welcome to the temple. Today I want to discuss what it means to me to walk a path of a priestess of the Magdalene, because I do see a lot of information out there that I think is misinformation. Sometimes it's well intended, but it's still misinformation, and sometimes I think it is being put out there just for profit. A lot of people using Mary Magdalene's name in order to sell a course, sell a way of life that is not really aligned with the woman that Mary Magdalene was, the archetypal energy that she actually is, and the message that she was actually invested in herself when she was walking on the earth. One of the best places that we can start if we want to connect with Mary Magdalene is with the Gospels, the canonical Gospels that she is mentioned in, and also the Gnostic Gospels, so Gospels like the Pistis Sophia, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, her own Gospel. There is more than enough information for us to go off in these Gospels, even to create a spiritual path that aligns with what Mary Magdalene was invested in. There is more than enough information in these Gospels for us to do that. And I think it's a good place to start, especially for beginners, if you're reading a lot, hearing a lot, and you're confused about temple priestesses, scent priestesses, sex priestesses, the rose lineage, links to Egypt. A lot of people are sharing information that comes from what would be channeled messages, what people say that they are in connection with Mary Magdalene and they're channeling her words, and it can get really overwhelming and really confusing when you feel Mary Magdalene call and you go to Google or you go to YouTube or Instagram or wherever, and you come across all these different terms and these images and connections with womb healing and yoni healing and things like that, and then you can't find the source of any of that information. It's just somebody on social media is saying something as if it's fact, and it can be really, really overwhelming, and it can end up really detracting from the true essence of Mary Magdalene. And of course, with a spiritual practice, it's really important that we're not saying to somebody, your spiritual practice is wrong, your spiritual experience isn't true, it's wrong, I'm right. That's not what it's about. But it's also really important for us to be discerning, really discerning when we are researching anything at all, but especially spiritual information, because unfortunately there are a lot of people out there who do prey on people who are looking for answers, spiritual answers. They know that our hearts are open, we are willing to receive information, to receive guidance, higher guidance, and sometimes people step in the way of that. They put themselves in the way of that and say, I've got all the answers, listen to me. And so that's why I think it's really important, where we can, to go as much back to source material as possible, which we can do with Mary Magdalene because we have those Gospels, the scriptures. So when we read those scriptures, we can see a blueprint, a path for a priestess of the Magdalene, because we have that information. So looking first to the canonical Gospels, what we know of Mary Magdalene, where she is actually named as Mary Magdalene, we know that she actually helped to pay for Jesus to spread his ministry, to spread his message. She provided financially for him, along with some other women that also provided financially for him. So we know that Mary Magdalene is very invested in the message of Jesus. And so if we want to get close to Mary Magdalene, it's prudent of us to read the scriptures, read what Jesus is saying. But it's also important for us to discern the difference between what Jesus was trying to say and what the church has turned that into, because they can be very different at times. And I know for some people, there might be religious trauma, and it might be very difficult for you to approach reading the Gospels, reading the Bible, but it is something that is really important if you want to work with Mary Magdalene, because ultimately she was invested in Jesus's message, And so we should, I believe, if we want to walk as priestesses of the Magdalene, we should understand the teachings of Jesus. But again, from a spiritual perspective, not from an organized religion perspective. So that's the first thing we know about Mary Magdalene. The other thing we know is that she was at the foot of the cross when Jesus died. She witnessed him go through the agony. I spoke about this in my last video about Mary Magdalene as death doula. She's not afraid of looking at the difficult things, dealing with the difficult things, supporting people through difficult times. And she must have done so much inner work to master her own emotions, to be able to hold that space. So we know that as priestesses of the Magdalene, we can use that as an example to do the inner work on ourselves, to look at our emotions, to see how do we react, how do we respond to big emotions from other people, how can we be supportive to other people, how can we just hold space, how can we just witness people through their darkest times, but also doing the inner work that it requires for us to do that. So there's the work of holding people and supporting people and not being afraid to witness difficult things for other people and for ourselves as well, doing the inner work. The other thing we know as well is that Mary Magdalene went to the tomb to anoint Jesus after his physical death on the cross. She went to prepare his body. So again, you could take that literally as she was a death doula, but you can look at it more sort of figuratively. And again, she's not afraid of going into the dark, into the tomb, to witnessing death, whether that's a physical death or it could be seen as a spiritual death, an egoic death, and to priestess somebody through that experience, but also the work again that she would have had to do with herself, facing her own shadows, facing and mastering her own fears of going into that tomb, of seeing a loved one having died, and to touch their body, to be present with them. The other thing that we know about Mary Magdalene from her own gospel, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, when she talks about the 7 powers that she has overcome to reach higher levels of consciousness, and from the Pistis Sophia as well, where there's a conversation between Jesus and his disciples, and it's Mary Magdalene and Mother Mary who are very active in that conversation. They are the ones that keep getting up and saying, hang on a minute, have I got this right? Have I understood you right? You mean this? Is that right? Wait a minute, let me just ask you a question. Oh, you've answered her question, now answer my question. So they are spiritual seekers. They are thirsty for information. They are not afraid to ask. They are not afraid to dig. They are not afraid to go further. And that's where it goes back to what I was saying about doing the work for yourself, not just listening to a channeled message, not just watching a YouTube video where someone's telling you something. Go and search out this information for yourself in the source material, in the scriptures, because that is the example that Mary Magdalene sets for us. The other thing we know of Mary Magdalene from her own gospel, the Gnostic gospel of Mary Magdalene, is that she went through these 7 powers. She faced these 7 inner demons, if you like, in order to reach higher states of consciousness. And what this tells us is that, again, she is a spiritual seeker, but she wants to experience that for herself. So she wants to be asking questions, she wants to be researching, but she wants to be doing the work for herself as well. And when you read her gospel, when she goes through these 7 powers, it's very quick. You know, it's like, I saw this power, it said this to me, I said that to it, and then I moved on, and then it was the next power. So it makes it sound like it was a really quick process. But as with a lot of things in scriptural writing, it can be allegories, it's a story kind of made shorter to help us understand things more easily. So we can imagine that this process actually took a lot longer and was an ongoing process, and is akin to what we would talk today about as shadow work. So doing the work on ourselves, going in, looking at ourselves, the parts of ourselves that perhaps don't behave in a very becoming way, parts of ourselves that hold us back from really speaking our truth, which was something that Mary Magdalene was very insistent on. And so it's doing that work, doing the inner work, working with our shadows, discovering ways in which we can understand ourselves better and then conduct ourselves better. The other thing we know about Mary Magdalene is that she is not afraid to speak her truth, and when she's challenged on that, she does not meet conflict with conflict. So in her own gospel, when Peter challenges her and says, I don't believe this, and Andrew says, this can't be true, she doesn't rise up in anger and attack them. She meets them with the heart, and because she is speaking her truth from her heart, she has no problem saying, I am speaking the truth. Do you not believe me? And that again is another example for us to speak our truth. Speak from the heart always and speak our truth, because when we do that, it's a lot easier for us to defend a truth over a lie. When you're standing in your truth, you have this kind of aura and energy around you that you just don't have when you're standing in a lie. And when people do challenge you, it's easier not to have to attack them, because you can stand confident in the fact you know this is the truth of your heart and that you're speaking from that truth of the heart, and not meeting conflict with conflict. Conflict bears conflict, if you shout at someone, they're more likely to shout back, because it's how we're programmed to be defensive if someone seems to be attacking us. But in our modern world, usually raised voices, shouting doesn't actually mean physical interaction, and so we can walk the path of the heart instead and remain calm and meet that person with love, even if they're challenging us, even if they're telling us they don't believe us, and we can sit confidently in our truth. And through all this, Mary Magdalene really shows us what it is to be fully human, experiencing all these difficult things that she's going through, witnessing someone through death, being in conflict with people over her truth, but also what it is to be fully divine, doing the inner work that she has to do, doing that inner journeying, going further into herself, into her shadows, meeting herself, so that she can ascend to higher states of consciousness and reaching that divine state of being able to walk in love all the time. And so I think as a starting point, there's much more that we could go into about the message of Mary Magdalene and different ways we can work with her. But I think as a starting point, there is more than enough there, just in the scripture, for us to begin to see a roadmap of how we can walk as priestesses of the Magdalene, and how we can represent what Mary Magdalene stood for on the earth. I hope that was helpful for you. I plan to share some more resources outside of scripture that I think can be used as a starting base if scripture is not somewhere you feel comfortable beginning your journey with Mary Magdalene. But I think these resources rely heavily and go back to scripture for their information. So I do think they can be good places to start as well. So I'll be sharing those with you as well. Many blessings.